look, if we're recording video, I'm going to need you or one of our rich donors to give me 20 grand so I can get suits and glasses.
It's tax deductible, Matt. You can just do it yourself.
Look, we opened last week's episode with me talking about like where our Russian dark money is. Today, I'm learning that people are giving Keir Starmer, of all people, tens of thousands of pounds to buy glasses. And like, I am blind as fuck, and my glasses are very expensive. And not one of my friends, even the wealthy ones, have even given me so much as a tenner, let alone 20 grand. What's going on? My question is, why is everyone else getting loads of free shit and loads of money, and I'm not, and you're not?
No one likes us. People only give us money when it's in exchange for goods and services.
Goods and services, yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like, this is I find this whole scandal very funny in the sense that, like, yeah, it was obvious this stuff was happening, but in the 2000s, Bertie Ahern, former Taoiseach of Ireland, got caught being given hundreds of thousands of pounds and euros, and his rebuttal was, "I don't have a bank account." Adamant. I don't have a bank account. How could I be doing this? I don't have a bank account.
I mean, it's not a bad lie.
It's not a bad defense. I'm not going to lie. And yeah, he pretty much got away with it as well. There was a huge tribunal that went on for years, and yeah, nothing happened.
Fucking A.
Yeah.
Oh, dearie me. Speaking of friends of the show, before we also move on to this week's episode, and you are listening, by the way, friends, to Beneath the Skin, the podcast about everything, told through the history of tattooing. My name's Dr. Matt Lodder, and I'm here with the beautiful, the good-looking, the kind, the attractive, the empathetic, and the modest Thomas O'Mahony.
Fuck modesty, I'm going to start calling myself Professor Tom.
Did you see friend of the show, MJ Forrest, bought some OG 1940s Goanna salve?
Yeah, I did. I watched it this morning, and it smelled terrible.
If you haven't listened to our episode about Australian tattooing, and particularly Lindsay Vane, watch that and give MJ Forrest a follow, because he's obsessed with Goanna salve, which is exactly what it sounds like. Tom, look, for today's episode, I was listening to a new podcast by Jamie Loftus, the brilliant Jamie Loftus, about Sword. Is it called Sword Masters? It's like 1980s Amiga game where they were giving away loads of money to people and doing a whole podcast about it. So I thought we should do something about computer games. I did a whole YouTube video thing a couple of years ago for GameSpot, where we talked about tattoos in video games. But I wanted to do a deep dive today through using this art historical lens that I try and bring to things, thinking about what we call indexicality, right? Like what a particular piece of media can tell us about the time it was made, and talk about a computer game. Well, a computer game that didn't actually properly formally get released. It was abandonware because it was just so utterly terrible that it was unreleasable. But it's such an incredible index of the period of its production, the mid-1990s, that I wanted to go into it in detail, because there's so much. Like, everyone's, I think, probably heard the top line story of this game, but the detail of it.
So we're
brilliant.
We're jumping way back in time to the olden times of the 90s.
1994, 1995. I mean,
year I was born, 95.
It was, so we're talking about this
Pogs,
game.
Alf, like all these things.
And more.
Smoking the fentanyl gel off a pain patch. All the cool things people were doing in the 90s.
We're talking about this game, Tattoo Assassins, this arcade beat-em-up game that was basically a Mortal Kombat ripoff. And it comes at this the reason I think it's so interesting, one of the reasons I think it's so interesting, is it comes in the 90s when, as we've talked about before, and as people will see in my new book, I think the 90s is like the end of tattooing. I don't mean that in any way other than the Fukuyama sense, right? Like Francis Fukuyama, who said the 90s were the end of history.
I hate when history keeps happening. It just keeps happening, and we were supposed to be at the end of it.
He published an essay, Fukuyama, that was like, why I'm still convinced that it's the end of history. Anyway, we haven't got time to go into Fukuyama. But the point is, like, in the 90s, or after the 90s, really, everything becomes possible. And there's so much incredible tattooing, but nothing's left to be invented, really, stylistically. There are so many amazing tattooers. We talked about a list of them last week. And I don't mean this nostalgically either. I'm not saying the 90s were better than now. In many ways, they're not. But it's just to say that it becomes basically impossible to do the kind of methodological history that I want to do about tattooing after really the 2000s. We talked about this on our episode when we talked about the Tattoo the Earth tour for the same reason.
And
But
if you're interested in the very current context of that, stay tuned to our Instagram where I will be putting out a very, very lengthy video where I spoke at length about it.
cool. So, yeah, because so this moment in the 90s is a moment when tattooing is like edgy enough to still be kind of like branding for this kind of edgy subcultural computer game or a game that sort of had pretenses towards that. But it was popular enough that it could attract an audience, and it still had these recognizable kind of styles that were distinct enough that they could give the IDs to all these different characters, 9 playable characters in the game. And I just think it's a really, really interesting, almost like companion piece to our discussion about the Tattoo the Earth tour, which happened maybe about 4 or 5 years later, 5, 6 years later.
Mm. That's very interesting in the sense that like this is kind of the like post video game crash resurgence in video games. Fidelity is increasing, so we've moved beyond 16-bit sprites. We're working with 64 bits in the early 90s. Obviously, for anyone who doesn't know, Atari released an ET game that was so bad it crashed the entire industry.
Yeah, that was probably a decade earlier than this, right?
Yeah. So a decade earlier, and what you had was the resurgence, or well, I suppose the emergence of Nintendo as a real powerhouse for home video game consoles. You had the emergence of other companies, and there was this real gold rush in the 90s for creating specifically fighting games, which is what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and this is also a period like just before the first, or straddling really the time when the first PlayStation comes out in 1994. So it's really a sort of really emblematic, and that spoiler alert, as I said, the game doesn't come out, and one of the reasons is really that just the whole market for this kind of game in the arcades just falls out of its arse. So it's called Tattoo Assassins. And it's was produced by this company called Data East, who were more known for making kind of pinball machines actually than computer games.
Specifically pinball machines.
Specifically pinball machines. They'd been making as part of this company called Stern Electronics. They'd been making pinball machines since the 80s. By the 90s, they're basically pinball's also unfashionable. They're losing money. They get bought by this Japanese company called Data East, who produced a few kind of knockoff games. They weren't small. The pinball machine division had done Simpsons pinball, Star Wars pinball, Guns N' Roses pinball.
And specifically where this story kind of picks up is that the head of the Data East branch that was manufacturing pinball machines became friends with the lead scriptwriter for Back to the Future after successfully producing a Back to the Future pinball machine.
Yeah, this is mad fact number one, right? That they get together with what's his name, Bob Gale, who is the co-writer and producer of all 3 Back to the Future movies, and Gale had done or helped help Data East, particularly this guy called Kamenikov, I guess it's pronounced, Joe Kamenikov, who's the creative lead on Tattoo Assassins. He met Bob Gale when they did a Back to the Future themed pinball machine, which we had in my student bar actually when I was doing my master's degree in the early 2000s. We had the Back to the Future game.
Maybe that's since everyone's really interested in late 90s 2000s again, we should bring pinball machines back.
Oh, I'm sure it's already happened. I'm sure we're way over. I'm sure we're way late with that.
Actually, did you see what I sent you earlier on, or did I send it to you? I saw on Instagram a vintage shop
Yeah.
selling a shirt from a Suicide Girls shirt from 2001
Uh,
as true early 2000s vintage.
yeah, we've got a listener who sells and collects vintage T-shirts, and he sent me one of those a few months ago, as saying that yeah, we're old. We're old.
Oh, text me. I want. If you can get me a true vintage typo negative T-shirt, I will give you tens of pounds.
My my friend Will drunkenly bought an Alien Ant Farm shirt from the early 2000s that cost him $300. So nostalgia is a powerful thing. So Bob Gale basically comes to Data East, to Joe Kamenikov, and says, "I've written a movie, and I don't know if we're going to get it made as a movie. I think it'd be a good script for a computer game." There's an amazing article that was written about this on a website called Gameological that doesn't exist anymore. The writer is called Ryan Smith, and he tries to interview Bob Gale. And bear in mind that Bob Gale wrote, as I said, co-wrote Back to the Future. Um, the article says Gale declined to speak to me for this story. What's in the past is in the past.
I mean, listen, this is a great thing about being an artist is that you don't have to talk about stuff. You can just make it. This is the difference between us and artists is that all we do is talk about stuff.
Yeah. So, Mortal Kombat's been massive. This company needs, sort of got one last roll of the dice. They have this, they can't afford any more big licenses. But they've got this opportunity to work with the legendary Bob Gale. So they're like, right, let's make this Tattoo Assassins game. And it is so bonkers in like the most 90s way possible. And what I want to do is go through every character, every main character, and go through who they are, what their tattoos look like everything. And every single one of them has this completely bizarre pop culture links, which you're going to be surprised by. I certainly was. But this is the plot of the thing, right?
But I suppose before we get into that, I think it's worth grounding why they made this game in the first place and talk about specifically like fighting games and their popularity. So fighting games were among one of the first genres of arcade games. They were like intensely popular both in the West and in Japan. And with the birth of home consoles, you had this like massive popularity in fighting games because of the prevalence of like couch co-op. It's like you can play games with your friends sitting on the sofa beside each other, something we have unfortunately lost. I used to love playing Halo 3 sitting beside my friends.
You can sit on my sofa anytime you want, Tom.
Yeah, but I'm not playing any games with you. And Mortal Kombat got released in 1992, both simultaneously as an arcade game and not simultaneously, but slightly afterwards as home consoles. There was some differences in terms of like on the SNES. Obviously, it was censored because Nintendo didn't like blood. But Mortal Kombat in and of itself was a gigantic phenomenon and was so intensely popular that you had this rush to fill in the groundswell of fighting games. So this is the birth of like things like Street Fighter, although I think Street Fighter 1 came out in 87.
It's all around the same time, right? Like a Tekken as well, like all of those Virtua Fighter, all of those things. I mean, I
nearly bought Nike and Tekken, or Bandai Namco specifically, did a collab of Jin Kazama foam posits that I wanted to buy so badly.
So, and this is what the Gameological article quotes, because they did a long interview with Kamenikov. It was a deranged take on a familiar template. Quote, Mortal Kombat was still the standard by which we were following. And it was like, that was a great game. We can do something like that, but we can do it more tense and be more weird and add an actual story to it. And goddamn, is it weird. This was one of the things Bob Gale wanted to do with it. And it was one of our bragging rights. We had this fighting game, but it also had a compelling story. I don't know how compelling it really was, but it was a story.
And I want to talk as well about the technology that really fueled this, in the fact that like Mortal Kombat was different in the sense that it wasn't traditional sprites that were featured in earlier games, where it's a character made up of a series of single pixels in order to form a shape. Mortal Kombat was different because it was like live action video of performers that was then converted into pixel art.
Rotoscoped, and there's some interesting tidbits about some of the actors that play the characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of like high production values to some degree, although it's, as I said, very very silly. And then, quote, as Kamenikov also explains, the tattoo element wasn't just shoehorned in to make the fighters look like streetwise badasses. Beyond the standard punch and kick buttons, the game featured a specific tattoo button which allowed the player to call upon unique powers. It was a little revolutionary because it allowed the layperson who didn't memorize all these moves to still beat the hell out of your competitor in a really disgusting way. Um,
This
so the
also
other,
comes out of like the early 90s obsession with gore media and stuff
oh
like
yeah,
that. So obviously like kind of gross out humor like and gross out media through like the popularity of B movies in the 80s really became like an industry, and in video games they were trying to capture that as well.
yeah, and it also is this moment that you've seen a lot of this theorizing in recent years about the 90s because as we'll talk about in more detail, this game is like hella misogynistic and hella racist in many
It was the
many.
90s.
Well,
Everyone was.
exactly. Right. That's the point. So, one of the big theoretical accounts of like 90s sexism, misogyny, racism is that the kind of liberal white elite media basically were like, oh, we've solved sexism and racism, so we can joke about it ironically now. So in the UK, we have, Loaded and Maxim and FHM magazine, which is like, a pretty sort of thin veneer of irony over the top of what at least a portion of which was pretty misogynistic bilge. Ditto with racism. If you go back and look at some of the 90s sitcoms in the UK, or not just in the UK, in the America as well, and so many of the jokes are homophobic and racist, and they're sort of couched as like
I can just see David
ironic.
Baddiel in blackface with a pineapple on his head
Yeah,
floating in the distance.
yeah, and I think one of the sort of theoretical accounts of that period now is that, as you said, well, everyone thought we'd solved racism. Well, everyone, white people, white media elites thought we'd solved racism, misogyny, so we could kind of joke about it ironically, and everyone would know we were joking. And so,
Ding, ding,
but
ding, ding, ding. You can hear South Park ringing you.
everything. I mean, basically it's just a sort of thin veil to do the same old misogynistic, racist shit, whilst kind of claiming some kind of like ironic distance. And I think so. I think there's a lot of that going on, and it's this is why I mean it's a really interesting icon of the time because it's full of really gross racism and sexism. But it's also kind of hyper ridiculous in a way that's hard to take seriously. But that's the part of the insidiousness of this stuff in a way. As funny and as joyous and as weird as it all is. So, okay, let's get to the game. Mullah Abba is calling you. He needs you to battle to choose an assassin. He needs you to choose an assassin to do battle with Koldan the Conqueror. You must recover the ancient ink of Giz, amorphous fluid organism which transforms into real objects for brief moments when applied to humans as tattoos. Be warned, Koldan's legions are loyal to the death. They will not allow you to pass without first being vanquished. So you've got basically this magic ink stuff, and this guy
Handed to you by a man in a nappy who's meant to be Egyptian with a big torso tattoo.
called Mullah Abba.
Mm-hmm.
And the big bad guy Koldan is sort of also ambiguously racialized, sort
Has
of
big Freddy Krueger hands.
big Freddy Krueger hands. He looks a bit Iranian,
It's the 90s. Hey, listen, once again, the 90s are back. America is obsessed with Iran.
Yeah. So the idea is that there's this magical ink of Giz, and it requires basically certain physiology to work, right? So only certain people can use this ink to become powerful, and like there's this group of people called the Color Guard, and Koldan's the leader of them, but only he is able to use this ink without dying. And then this guy Mullah Abba like finds another a woman who is called I think it's called Lena the Blue, played by Slash's wife.
Okay. Once again, the 90s.
Which is just her. I mean, played by. It's just her back is the loading screen for the game, with loads of like designs on them. So yeah, somehow like she gets to be this avatar through which the mystical power of the ink can be implanted onto another person, and then they can use it to fight. Right. So that's the plot. Basically, the way it manifests itself in the game is that every character has magical tattoos that come to life and have specific effects, like when they're used. And Mortal Kombat very famously got a lot of press and a lot of congressional focus and stuff for the finishing moves, the gore.
The
You mentioned some of that,
fatalities,
the
yeah.
fatalities, and so one of the things that Tattoo Assassins was doing in its marketing was saying we've got the most fatalities ever, right? And I want to find you this quote because it's one of the reviewers. Some reviewer points out how absurd it is, and I've got so many tabs open.
Yeah, and also I suppose a bit of background on like the controversy of violence in video games had been like rumbling since like 1976 with the release of Death Race, which was a very very basic arcade game where you drove over civilians for points, and it had been rumbling like for about 20 years at this stage. Obviously, it will like hit its apex with stuff like the release of Grand Theft Auto, and then also Columbine,
Yeah,
that thing that happened in 1999.
yeah.
But America had become obsessed with these ideas that the media that young people were consuming was corrupting the youth. This is, I suppose, an idea that had been floating around in America since its founding and just in general.
Well,
Um,
the same year that Tattoo Assassins was in development, 1994, Penn and Teller, the magicians, did a spoof video game / art project called Desert Bus. Have you heard about this?
no.
Desert Bus is amazing. I teach my students about it. Like they were, as sort of libertarians, I suppose, interested in debunking this idea that video games led to violence. And so they created this video game that was like just the most boring game possible. It's an 8-hour driving simulator where you're driving a bus between California and Las Vegas on a desert road that's straight. You can't just let the bus go because you'll crash. And every completed journey is 1 point.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just on an empty bus driving on a straight line for 8 hours.
Well,
and it's this satire of wage slavery and of like the valorization of work and a critique of this narrative around violence in video games and violence in popular culture more generally in the Clinton era.
And since then, those sort of games are now the most popular game in Germany.
Well, they've turned it into this great charity thing that they do every year called Desert Bus for Hope. It's had you can get it on your mobile phone now. It's had a kind of high virtual reality render. It's amazing. It's really, really interesting project. It's completely cynical. But you're right. This conversation about violence is in the air, right?
Yeah, and it's funny because now you just have thousands of German men who will get off their job from driving a bus all day to go home and play Eurobus Simulator.
Well, so Tattoo Assassins like really leans into this. Like, if we're going to be violent and disgusting, the developer base is like, we had no taste, like we had no decorum, we just completely wanted to do this batshit crazy thing. And so this is a quote from an article about the game by Den of Geek. Altogether, there are 50 to 60 fatalities in the game, but Data East wanted to play up the whole quantity over quality angle. One version of the game claimed the game had over 200 fatalities. Another claimed 2,196. That's a total bullshit number, as you can probably guess. The way I see it, I'm pretty certain they were trying to count each combination of fighters as its own fatality. Like Truck, one of the characters shooting his victim with a shotgun, counts 9 times. It can be done against 9 different people. Or perhaps they were straight up lying because they stopped caring. And like, bear in mind, right, this, as I said, what happened with the game, they were under so much pressure to get this game out. They were on $25,000 bonuses, the team, and $25 per cartridge shipped if it got released and sold as a bonus. So
I like those incentives, to be honest.
Yeah. The carrot in front of the big bonuses, the team was doing 90-hour weeks. Almost literally every waking moment was dedicated to finishing the game. We were doing laundry for people, bringing in masseuses while they're sitting in the chairs. We bought breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And basically, it becomes like really shit. And the story also goes that everyone's so fucking fed up with it that by the end, the art guys are like, I can't be fucked anymore. I'm sure the programming guys are going to make something cool happen so that the game will be good, even though the art's shit. And the programming guys were like, oh, this game is dog shit, but at least like it will look cool. Maybe the art guys will fix it. So everybody hated it. No, it was like absolutely rushed. They were trying to get it out for this gaming convention, the Acme gaming convention. But they were just running out of time, right? They were working in like last gen technology, 256 colors at a time when the world was in 1024. Like it was just bad, right? And it also has this crazy plot. What do you think about the story? Let's talk about that before we get on to the characters.
I think in general, trying to put stories into fighting games doesn't really work. Like all of the, I suppose, storytelling in fighting games is generally diegetic, and like you can read.
I guess it doesn't really matter, right?
It doesn't matter in terms of like a gameplay sense. In terms of like a meta narrative, yeah, it does make sense. Like a lot of like Tekken is a good example that like Tekken does have a story, and each game is a continuation of that story. But the vast majority of like fighting games, the story is just kind of set dressing and like a reasoning for it to be there.
Well, it's funny. One of the Roger Ebert, the famous American film critic, was asked around this time about video games and whether he thought they were art or not. And I as an artist wouldn't think that's a stupid question in the first place. But Ebert, as a film guy, basically said like computer games aren't art in his terms because they don't have a like single narrative. Like he thinks that there should be some authorial purposiveness, and if you've got options and if anything can happen, it doesn't kind of rise to this level of like authorial intent where there's. I don't think that's true, right? But for Ebert, narrative and the quality of narrative and the singularity of narrative in film and I suppose literature is what separates like art from non-art as far as he's concerned. So
I mean, but as an aside, I think that argument is bullshit and
I think it's bullshit too.
Can be applied to like look at French New Wave cinema, like like early 1930s and 40s, like surrealist cinema. Like what? I don't know. Are you going to argue that Kenneth Anger movies aren't art?
No, Ebert might do.
Yeah, well, fuck Roger Ebert, and fuck critics. The only critic that matters are the two that are on this podcast.
Okay, so what I want to do, I want to go through the 9 characters and talk about them in order. I'm going to send you a link here so you can like open them up and go through.
Hey, are you enjoying the show? If you really like Beneath the Skin and you want to help support us, you can do so on Patreon. For little as £5 a month, you can help make this show possible, help us buy research materials. So if you like the show and you want to support us, consider kicking us a few quid a month. And you'll get everything from bonus episodes to Q&As, and you can even vote on what tattoo I'll get when we reach a certain subscriber count. Matt, have you got anything to say?
You should really definitely fund the Patreon because tattoo history is massive, right? Deep, wide, complicated. We're covering some big hit topics on the main feed, but on the Patreon subscriber-only feed, we'll be getting into some really more interesting, niche, deep topics you don't want to miss out on. And honestly, the chance to kind of decide what Thomas gets on his body is probably just a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Subscribe, chuck us a few quid. Don't miss out on the chance to ruin Thomas's body forever. So our first character, I mean, again, as I said, this is the most 90s thing ever. AC Current, good name.
Yeah.
Get it?
Yeah.
AC Current is a cyber mercenary who travels the net cracking computer systems for the highest bidder. After being set up by an industrial espionage double cross, AC's wanted by Interpol and his former employers.
Honestly, kind of great, extremely 90s setup. Also, I love that this is on the Giant Bomb wiki, RIP Giant Bomb. Yeah, like this is so 90s. The design is great. It's like obviously like a Johnny Cage rip off, but he has like a big blue lightning bolt across his chest.
Yeah, which becomes important. So yeah, how are we going to describe his tattoo designs? I guess.
So he's like has this like big bisecting line and like an open thing on his chest that's obviously meant to look like circuitry, and then a big neon blue lightning bolt across his chest, and he's wearing like a kind of Cyclops from X-Men visor.
Yeah. Like so did you hear about this computer game that got released for 2 weeks? It's Marina Hyde reckons it's the biggest flop in cultural history. This game Concord that
Oh
Sony
yeah.
released a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
$400 million, and it like lasted 2 weeks. Anyway, one of the reviews of that said that the characters were in that game were both over designed and under designed, and I think that's a really good critique of tattoo assassins. So our pal AC here, as you said, he's got this kind of cyber tech kind of vibe. I don't know if anyone at the time had tattoos like that. I suppose so. Like it's very kind of like neo tribal spiky stuff.
I would say it's maybe about like 9 years too early.
Yeah, right. And so we'll talk about some of every character has their own fatalities, and then there are some general ones which we'll talk about at the end because they're even more bonkers, the generic ones. But AC's sort of power moves are basically all kind of lightning bolt related, like lightning bolts, ground bolts, high voltage mates, electric shields, nail guns. It's all kind of like super zippy. And then what's really fun about tattoo assassins is that if you complete them, every single character has his own or her own ending, basically. So his one, let me bring this up. His ending is superb. So if you fight through the game and you win as AC, you get this ending. So basically, they're all sort of styled as like newspaper headlines,
Yeah. Great workload saving tactic.
Great kind of storytelling device. Lazy as fuck. So this is in a newspaper called NerdNet Daily, number one in the world.
Number one news source for nerds.
No, yeah. So his ending, you beat the big bad. AC Current voted Game Maker of the Century. AC returns to the business world and uses his tattoos to extort billions of dollars from major corporations. Freak lightning storm destroys his factory. AC then buys a controlling interest in every video game manufacturer, thus ensuring that no game will ever be censored for violence, sex, and language. AC Current was voted Game Maker of the Century. He's like Elon Musk. He buys the video games for free speech.
This is so deeply 90s.
Yeah, but everything 90s is back again. Like Elon Musk is the villain in a 90s sci-fi film.
He just wants to say the word.
Yeah, so AC Current wants to say the word, man. He doesn't want games to be censored.
Oh my god, game censorship. Now we had game censorship and now people are worried about games being woke.
How do you think he could use his tattoos to extort billions of dollars from major corporations?
I don't know.
That's glossed over. We just get the headlines.
I don't know, shock people's balls or something. I don't know.
Okay, we'll do these in alphabetical order. Mm-hmm. So our next character.
Oh no!
Yeah, this is the most racist of several racist characters. Do you want to describe this next character, Thomas?
So, the next character is Billy Two Moons, a Native American wanted by the U.S. government for defending an ancient Indian burial site.
Yep. Yeah, he's a
topical like, for the 90s,
quote unquote. Well, we'll get to topical. Like he gets to be this. Do you remember WWF wrestling at this time? They had a character called Tatanka.
Yep,
who was a similar kind of like disgusting caricature. one of the reviews of this game described Billy Two Moons as making the Washington Redskins mascot look woke.
Yeah, so he's wearing a vest and a traditional wide brim hat with a feather in it. He has a giant eagle tattoo and a tomahawk on his shoulder.
And his moves are, amongst other things, a crouching axe, an in-air axe, a bow and arrow.
One of his fatalities is scalping his opponent.
Oh yeah, one of his fatalities is scalping his opponent. In this disgusting racist way. He does war whoops.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah. And old Billy Two Moons' ending. Talking about topical. The newspaper announcing his victory over Coldan is called the McCarthy Today.
Oh God!
And the photo is him beheading or threatening to behead Bill Clinton.
Hey, listen, I won't say any more.
Victorious over Coldan, Billy goes to Washington, D.C. and gets presidential order protecting his ancestral burial ground and clearing his name. Here's how he did it. Yes, sir, Mr. Two Moons, sir, whatever you want, sir. So he just basically threatened to murder President Clinton, and then his ancestral burial ground was protected. I did note, by the way, that just a few years later, about 10 years later, Hillary Clinton was involved in the Keystone XL pipeline scandal. So maybe this.
Yep. It's like Nostradamus. Tattooed assassins predicted it all. So, next is Derek O'Toole.
Oh, he's the Irish character. He's actually Northern Irish, actually.
Yeah.
A Northern Irish aging rocker who...
accused of taking part in terrorist activities in his hometown of Belfast. We are forced to develop fighting skills to defend himself. He is now part of the underground club scene. Once again, 1994. His name is O'Toole, so you can guess which side he's on.
His tattoos are like kind of skulls and stuff.
Yeah, his fatalities are he summons a skeleton out of his chest.
Oh, it's so cool. You can find videos of all this on YouTube, even though the game wasn't released. Someone did actually leak the ROM a few years ago, and you can actually see people playing a more or less finished version of the game.
Yeah.
Billy O'Toole is like the kind of rock star character, and yeah, his stuff is super, super cool. I really, really like it.
Yeah. Then you have Hannah Hart.
Do you want to know his ending?
Oh yeah, tell me his ending.
Victorious over Coldan, he returns to Britain, exonerated, is signed by a major record label. His first CD goes triple platinum, creating a new genre, kickbox rock.
I can't even parse what this is a reference to.
Yeah, what is that reference?
I'm saying that, and I'm wearing this T-shirt. I don't know. Were they big fans of Ash? I don't know.
You think he's like Tim from Ash?
I don't know.
Well,
anyway,
isn't he more likely to be Bono?
Oh yeah, but Bono's a weird fence sitter.
Isn't he Bono? So Hannah Hart. I'll tell you this for free. Hannah Hart, the actor that played Hannah Hart, was Gretchen Stockdale. Do you know who Gretchen Stockdale is?
No.
She's the woman to whom O.J. Simpson sent a voicemail saying that he probably committed a murder 3 hours before he was caught.
What?
Yeah.
This game is insane. Canonically, the IRA exists in Tattoo Assassins, and
she
OJ?
was a major witness at the O.J. Simpson trial. Prosecutors wanted the tape recording of the message in which Simpson says on the voicemail, "Hey, Gretchen, sweetheart, it's Orenthal James, who's finally at a place in his life where he's totally unattached with everybody. Ha 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 ha."
What the fuck? The fuck?
That's what I mean. It's the most 90s thing ever.
I'm actually in shock at just how many tendrils in time are reaching out from this game and just clawing at relevance.
So Gretchen Stockdale was a LA Raiders cheerleader
Mhm.
And yeah, like she said, when game producer Mike Marvin, who directed me in a film called The Dragon Gate, told me he was working on a video game, I told him I wanted to be part of it. And he said to me, Gretchen, you don't know how to kickbox. And I said, hey, I don't know how to shoot a bow and arrow either, but I learn how to do that. So let me learn how to kickbox. So she trained for 3 weeks to become a kickboxer.
I mean, you don't have that many moves, so.
And then she says, if they make a major motion picture of tattoo assassins, maybe I'll get there.
Yeah.
And she has her finish. So her character Hannah Hart is this assassin.
Stripper on a mission.
Yeah, is again the most 90s thing. She's a stripper / assassin, and her tattoos are all spiders. And so she's got kind of like a lower back tattoo of a spider because she's a 90s stripper. And so all of her like moves where she like deploys the spider involve her like arching her back over like she's like in a strip club and firing the spider off of her lower back. A world-class strip dancer until a deranged killer started stalking her and murdered her best friend, which is ironically given her connection to OJ. She now prowls the night in search of the man who ruined her life. And this is the next mad 90s reference. So
wait, no. How does her story end?
So her end. How would you like it to end? How would you like?
She finds the man who killed the strippers.
She does. Having conquered Coldan, Hannah returns home and successfully hunts down and dispatches the man who killed her sister, 3-time convicted rapist found strangled by silk cord. Tiring of a life of violence, Hannah uses her new tattoo powers to become a thriving entrepreneur. And all of the characters, this is the next 90s reference, all of the female characters, if you complete the game perfectly, are said to have basically cut Coldan's dick off like Loretta Bobbitt.
And in another 90s reference, the next character is Carla Keller, who is a very, very obvious reference to Nancy Kerrigan.
Yeah, very thinly veiled reference to Olympic ice skater and beat down victim Nancy Kerrigan,
who famously had her ankle broken by Tonya Harding.
Yeah, and there was a rumor apparently that they were even going to change the character's name to Nancy, although one of the developers denies that. But she's this like, Olympic ice skater. She was cheated from her chance to compete in the Olympics when her rival Eva Gunter attempted to cripple her in a late night ambush. She's sworn vicious revenge. Her tattoos are like largely kind of ice skating themed, so lots of her moves are ice. But she also has a massive rose on her stomach.
Yeah.
So loads of her moves. These are some of my favorite ones. I mean, it looks absolute shit in the sprite. It looks like a kind of prolapsed ass. But loads of like her rose comes to life and like strangles people and like turns into a kind of carnivorous plant. Absolutely amazing.
It's a bit of Poison Ivy. Batman Forever came out around this time.
Totally exactly the same. Then we've got the token black character,
Luke Cord, which is a very obvious.
Oh, sorry, I didn't tell you Hannah's. I didn't tell you Cara Keller's ending.
Okay.
She's dispatched 8 fighters, destroyed 3 mutants. So the 3 sort of sub bosses are all mutants. One of whom's a zombie, one of whom's a half woman, half rhino, and one of whom's a crystal.
Yep.
What will she do now? I'm going to Disneyland.
Fun. Okay, next one.
Then we have Luke Cord. Luke Cord, the sort of CIA assassin, Navy SEAL stranded after a secret operation against the Soviets, was compromised by a bureaucrat. He's been declared dead by the US Navy, but the CIA still contract out on him because of his knowledge.
He's a very obvious reference to Luke Cage from the Marvel comics. He has a giant octopus tattoo on his chest.
Yeah, and his finishing moves get to be like, he almost has the kind of Dream of the Fisherman's Wife by Hokusai come out. He sort of squirts ink. He's again pretty freaking cool. His ending is where are we? He decides to expose the double agent spy in the CIA, only to learn the culprit's already in jail. He then moves to Hollywood, where he creates and stars in a successful TV sitcom.
You can tell they're kind of starting to give up by this point.
They've really given up. Most of the characters are like, crimes they didn't commit, right? Like that's
Yeah.
of course the charismatic black guy gets to have a successful TV sitcom.
Yeah. Then the next we have Maya, who is Maya's father, a tribal chief, was killed by a foreign land developer intent on taking over her tribe's land. Maya taught her people to use guerrilla tactics against the foreigners, and now the developers want her dead as well. It is the 90s. We are talking about Latin America.
Yeah, she gets to have a blow dart, and her tattoos are of tigers. Yeah, and of course, again, in terms of like the ending of her story, she gets to defeat the bad guys. Developers cancel island plans. A mysterious wild tiger brutally mauls the developers who killed her father. She assures the surviving developers she can make these tiger attacks cease. Developers cancel island plans, donate $23 million to restore the environment. 6 times a year, Maya appears in Las Vegas with a magic act involving disappearing tigers. So she's sort of like a weird, like, tattooed version of Siegfried and Roy.
Yep. Then next we have Tak Hata.
Oh yeah, the you knew this was coming.
Yeah, is a former Yakuza assassin. When the governor's daughter was killed by the son of a powerful crime lord, Tak was framed for the murder. He is now wanted both by the Yakuza and the Japanese police, and he has a 2-headed dragon on his torso.
Yeah, and that has some incredibly badass moves where the dragon comes to life, and one move where it becomes Barney the fucking dinosaur.
Yeah. Oh, I gotta say, like the sprite work on the tattoo moves is like really good.
Yeah.
Like when Maya summons the tiger, it's actually really well done.
Yeah, and you can see like that's probably where they've put most of the energy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the dragon gets to be Barney the fucking dinosaur.
Yep.
And
then
so his story ends by returning to Japan and convincing his enemies to undertake ritual suicide.
Okay.
And with his honor restored, he moves to the United States, where he becomes a successful restaurateur and playboy.
So he is literally just Steve Aoki's dad, the inventor of Benihana.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I told you this was the most 90s thing ever.
And then, no, in the most 90s thing ever, the last playable character is a guy called Truck Davis.
Truck. Describe Truck.
So Truck is what I would describe as racially ambiguous man with a giant snake on his chest. Truck is the last surviving member of the Holy Terrors biker gang. The Holy Terrors were ambushed by a rival gang, the Sore Losers, after they lost a drinking contest. Now Truck has a score to settle, and the losers want to finish the job.
Right.
Once again, incredible sprite animation for when he uses the snake.
And bear in mind, and also he smashes beer bottles over his head. So he's a bald guy with a beard, a goatee, wearing a leather vest, crushing beer cans on his head, exactly like Stone Cold Steve Austin, but about 4 or 5 years before Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Yep. 316, baby.
So he gets to kind of, I don't think the WWE were copying him, but this is an archetype that's in the air in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
He gets to I mean, again, our friend MJ will be happy with this, because of course with the snake he wipes out the Sore Losers biker gang by snake venom. He then, quote, starts a brewery and uses his tattoo powers to make his product the '1 beer in the world.
I would not be surprised if this is the inspiration for Stone Cold Steve Austin.
How?
Like, what city was this developed in?
Chicago.
Well, Stone Cold's from Texas. I wouldn't be surprised. I would not be surprised.
So how do you think his tattoo powers allowed him to start the world's best beer company?
I don't know.
I don't know why.
It's very obvious they put a lot of effort into the first 4 characters, and then the rest of them, they're like, I don't know, he starts a brewery.
So we've talked about the tattoo-themed fatalities, but that, as we said, that wasn't enough. They had to up the number of fatalities, right? So the other things you can do in the game, you can make every character naked.
You can make every character fart on each other.
Not just fart, but fart flames that melts their face and skeleton off.
Yep.
It's fucking incredible. And this is a good one. And this is again from that Ryan Smith article. Of the 2,196 bloody and bizarre finishing moves crammed into the never-released arcade fighting game Tattoo Assassins, none surpass the weirdness of Happy Thanksgiving. Tapping high kick, low punch, high punch button in quick successions at the end of a match prompts a victorious character such as lightning-fingered cyber mercenary AC Current to drop his pants. A canned fart noise plays. AC craps out a whole roast turkey in the direction of his opponent. The platter of meat multiplies into a dozen more turkeys, and the flying fowls bounce both competitors into the air. That's called Happy Thanksgiving as a move.
Once again, like the Mortal Kombatification of fighting games in the 90s has been studied. It has been studied, but it's
you can drop a cruise ship on people, a bowling ball, a Godzilla.
You can run people over with a DeLorean.
You can run people over with the DeLorean. You can turn them into variously the Mona Lisa, the fucking Gainsborough's Blue Boy, and Whistler's mother. Like, it's got a whole art history fatality subline for some reason.
Well, this is the thing, is like Mortal Kombat like became famous because of the fatalities, and people who aren't smart, like, feel like I'm safe in saying that, didn't realize that, like, yes, the fatalities were like what made people like constantly put money in the machines, but it's also Mortal Kombat was a very competent fighting game outside of the fatalities.
This was not.
No.
I mean, the idea that, yeah, you get like these references to like American Gothic, like, it's completely bonkers.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of shitting. The Billy Two Moons character, like, one of his moves is a phoenix comes out of his chest and shits on people and melts them to their skeleton.
Yeah.
Like, it's
90s.
It's the 90s.
It's the 90s. We got tribal. We got people shitting on each other. It's the 90s.
It's the 90s. And yeah, like, ultimately, it's a shit game. One of the reviewers who got play testers basically said, like, was it cheesy? You betcha. Was it bad? Well, I've played worse fighting games. Was it released? I don't know. It was neat working on it, but he doesn't put it on his CV.
Yeah, it's not real resume filler.
It's not real resume filler. And, like, yeah, I just think, so basically, the biggest problem with those so this is from the developer after the fact. We were all burnt out. We knew the game was crap. We were no longer capable of fixing it. After we got back from this Acme show, we were so crispy that we no longer cared about the money. Our only true reward for finishing was we wouldn't have to fucking work on it anymore. The artwork looked bad because it'd been a rush job to make the show. The artists were talented, but their talent was being scuttled in dealing with crappy video source. New artists were brought on, but it was too little, too late. New games like Primal Range and Killer Instinct came out, and they blew Tattoo Assassins out the water. And then one programmer stopped working almost entirely in hopes of getting fired. He'd signed a 3-year contract, would have to be paid off if he got fired. He wanted out to go get married and start a .com. DP Digital East got sold to Sega, but we were on the D payroll. Sega. Yeah, and so basically, like, it all went to shit. I think this is a good line as well from the end of that interview with this guy, done by a guy called Dan, who released a lot of information about this on his website, bunnyears.net. He basically points out, right, he says, a tattoo appeared in a game magazine called EGM2, some kiddie vid rag. I've got a copy of that lying around. They had a shot of the diarrhea blast in there, if you can get a copy. So I don't know, it's like so weird and so silly and so offensive in lots of very specific 90s ways. The advert for the cabinet even includes, this idea that the control panel is vandal proof, like people might want to nick money from it. Hollywood meets Coin-Op. A crew of 41 movie makers, 15 programmers, 2 weeks of filming, and thousands of hours of digitizing images have gone into the making of Tattoo Assassins. And I don't know. I feel like, as I said, this is the end of being make sense of tattooing, because every single character there has a different style, right? You've got the Japanese Orientalist style, you've got the neo-tribal, you've got the American traditional, you've got the kind of like Borneo style, you've got the biker style. Like all of these get to exist separately in a way that just wouldn't be possible afterwards, right?
Yeah, it's a weird, interesting ephemera from the 90s of, but like it's the collection of so many 90s things like Nancy Kerrigan, the lady who found out OJ killed someone,
Yeah.
weird
The guy
tattoo stuff.
the guy that played the guy that played AC Current became a world champion Muay Thai fighter.
Mhm. And this
Um
is it, but that's in line with Mortal Kombat, like you know, employing like actors who knew like martial arts.
Yeah, like it's so weird. You know, the fact you've got Bill Clinton, OJ Simpson's close friend, references to Lorena Bobbitt, like and an avatar for Nancy Kerrigan is just.
Yep, yep.
So if we were sitting down to play this back in the day, who you playing?
I'd have to play the Irish guy just because
You're
for
being
reasons.
you're being Bono, Derek O'Toole.
Yeah, I'm being Derek O'Toole, engaging in terrorism. But yeah, that's it's so weird. You know what? It's great that like this game never got released because so many people would have bought it and been so mad.
Oh yeah. And I think it almost is better because it just exists as this sort of legendary thing. And as I said, I think a lot of people might have known the story that it existed, but it was nice to do a deep dive. You know, uh, everybody shot fire out of their asses. Everybody vomited. It was a free for all with all the weird shit that went into the game. There's one moment in one of the fatalities where they just drop a giant meat grinder from the ceiling. Like it's just weird in a way that sort of speaks to me.
Yeah, yeah. But with that,
With that,
I want to thank everyone for listening to the show. Most importantly, if you want to support the show, you can either do so through Patreon for as little as £3 a month, or you can pick up something from our web shop. We'll have some updates on some new stuff coming there soon. But yeah, every little bit helps. And with that, if you subscribe at the £10 and above tier, you get a shout out on the show. At £15, you currently get a copy of Matt's book, Painted People, and very soon you will get a copy of his new book, Tattoos, The Untold History of a Modern Art, by Dr. Matt Lauder, coming out in November. But with that out of the way, I want to thank Roy Hoxema, Morpheus Ravenna, Chris Block, Charlie Lightning, Shit Jesus, Seb Lewis, Reed Forden, Kirsten Wright, Kathleen Burkhardt, James Schick, Edub, Dylan, Casey Wardell, and Kaya Della Reos. Thank you all for listening.
thank you. We love you. Thank you so much.
And as always, don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Beneath the Skin Pod, where we can post some fun stuff like the aforementioned upcoming or posted video of me explaining why the iPad is bad for history. It's a goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me and from Derek O'Toole, inventor of kickboxing rock.